Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ Dhammaṃ Sanghaṃ Namasami. Those of you who aren't familiar with the tradition, the little chant that Alex just did was an invitation to speak and share some words, reflections from the teachings. Part of our tradition is to not go around preaching the good word unless we are asked and invited to do so. Kind of a little difficult to come up with some recollections or thoughts that are any more fruitful than the discussion we had at tea time. There were a lot of really excellent questions, a very nice discussion that we had at tea time. I feel very replete with that, but there are a number of people who weren't here. So try and come up with something that's useful. Kind of a common thread that seemed like came up through the questions and discussion. This common thread that seemed to me, anyway, as I thought about it, was this sense of control that we all would like to think we have in this life. And how that wish for, drive for control motivates so much of how we live our lives, what we do, where we put our attention, in trying to create a sense of security, refuge, stability in our lives. We all want to think that if we just act in a certain way or do certain things or seek certain things that we will be able to sustain an ongoing level of satisfaction, security, as a place of refuge, in a sense of material well-being or contentment in the world, as a basis for refuge, where we can rest, where we can set down the struggle. But it's good to reflect that, in this world, things are constantly changing. Nothing that we can identify in the world of conditions is everlasting. It's never going to give us a complete and stable, unwavering sense of satisfaction, sense of refuge, because things are always changing. So if we try and seek stability in a world that's unstable, we try and seek ultimate satisfactoriness in conditions that cannot be ultimately satisfying. If we try to create a sense of security in this constantly moving, changing set of conditions, then we will suffer. Because it doesn't meet our expectations of what we think the world should provide for us. Dashed expectations. But it doesn't keep us from stopping trying to control it all and trying to fix it and trying to find the perfect fix. So, we look at how it is that we constantly do this, the impulses that we respond to. We try and create this sense of control and stability in so many different ways. But there is only a modicum of control, a modicum of influence that we have. Many things are beyond that kind of control. I mean, just all the different painful situations that we can experience, people treating us in ways that we wish they wouldn't treat us, people saying and doing things that are harmful. I mean, just doesn't. If you even have a glance at the news these days, there's weird stuff going on out there. People, doing some pretty bizarre stuff, and hurting other people in the process. Sometimes a little bit, sometimes quite a lot. And to some extent, as an individual, we don't have a huge amount of control over what other people do, how other people act on those impulses. And that causes a lot of angst and frustration for us. I hasten to mention that it doesn't mean we don't do what we can do, but if we attach expectation to the results of what it is that we can and try to do, and it doesn't work, then we've just set ourselves up again for more suffering. People blame us, people criticize us. These are difficult things to bear. Nobody likes that, and we go out of our way to try and avoid those situations. To try and control the world around us, so that we don't have to experience blame and criticism. We avoid the people that we think might do that. We create certain habitual patterns of interaction to try and prevent that from happening, to try and elicit the praise and try to elicit the good reputation. We try and prop ourselves up, create images in ways that we think people will like us or approve of us or appreciate us, in an attempt to avoid the other side of those qualities, the negative, the downside. We develop a whole repertoire of ways of being in the world, of who we create ourselves to be, to present to the world around us, towards that purpose. We do all sorts of things to preserve a material sense of well-being. The world of finances, building wealth, attainments, to provide a sense of security. And how many people were devastated in that huge economic downturn we had when all of a sudden wealth just evaporated into the ether. Just didn't exist anymore. Pain, grief, and loss. And was largely something that was out of control of an individual, each individual. Then, not to mention, like we were talking about at tea time, the refuge, the investment we take into just our own personal lives, this human body, not wanting to really experience the fact that in some way or another, with relative ease and grace, or with a lot of difficulty, resistance, that this body will change. This body gets older, the body gets sick, and this flesh and blood will pass away. Ajahn Sudeda was here a couple of months ago, and he's 83 now, I think, 84, I can't remember which. And his very insightful ride, self-reflective comment was, I'm a whole lot closer to death than I am to birth right now. He's looking towards the end of his life. Of course, the inspiration being how, with a sense of ease and grace and acceptance that he's doing that with. But it's hard for us to look at that for ourselves. And when we see it in others close to us, it becomes also painful. And it's something that we do have some control over to some extent. We can influence what happens to our bodies. We can, and we try. Many people try to a great extent, not just the reasonable amount of care that we can give to our bodies, to give it proper nutrition if we can, and take medicine when we need to, keep it relatively fit. But sometimes people go to great extremes, extremely refined diets, extremely refined preferences, the absolute perfect balance, the highest quality kinds of things, the absolute peak performance exercises and ways that we maintain our attachment to this body, trying to keep it as young and healthy and vigorous as possible for as long as possible. And it's not, again, that we don't try and take care of it, but to what end, to what extent, to what level of obsession to try and give us a sense of control, sense of security. And, maybe we've worked on that to some extent and have let go of some of those expectations. But how many of us are really contemplating and thinking that the same thing could happen to our minds, to our intellects? How many times have we heard, maybe even thought to ourselves, it's like, oh, I don't really care what happens to the body. I know it's going to get old. I know it's going to get sick and die. But I don't want to lose my mental faculties. That's the worst thing that could possibly happen, We see sometimes people who have Alzheimer's disease or different cognitive deficits, or lose certain abilities of the intellectual capacity. And we think that is the worst possible thing that could happen. So what happens to us if we take refuge in our ability to think and reason and analyze and structure our mental world, structure the world around us? If we invest in that as a source of gratification and happiness, then what happens when that starts to fade, when we can't actually construct a thought in the way that we would like to? Can we be happy when we're just totally confused, when we don't have the ability to identify people around us to recognize friends, family. And we hope that that just won't happen. That's the worst thing that could happen. But it's all because of this kind of sense that we should, that we have control over all of these kinds of things. So we have to ask ourselves, well, what is it that we ultimately do have control over? So in the Buddhist teachings, he actually points all of this out very, very clearly. He doesn't mince words. He's not trying to offer a rosy picture of the world, but what he is trying to offer is a sense of where we actually can take refuge, because the message isn't just their suffering, although that's the first noble truth that we have to acknowledge. There is unsatisfactoriness in the ways that I was just talking about, but that there is also a way that we can hold our experience in the world and cope with it and not live in resistance or in opposition to the way of the world, the way of nature. And in a sense, that the old phrase that we hear from us all the time is so important. It's it's like that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. So we can't avoid the lack of control that we experience in many realms of our worldly experience, but we can have an effect on how we hold it and our response to it. And we don't have to bring on what the Buddha calls that second arrow. Get stabbed with the first arrow of pain and difficulty, but we don't have to stab ourselves over and over again with the second and third and fourth arrows of resistance, suffering, and expecting that it should be other than the way it is. So this is the positive aspect of what he is teaching us, and that there is a path leading to the ending of that kind of suffering, that optional kind of suffering. One of the, kind of just to give you just a teeny bit of a theoretical framework, one of the Buddhist teachings that kind of points to what it is that we have control over and what it is that we don't have control over, is his teaching on karma, which in one of his renditions of causality kind of frames it very, very well. And Ajahn does a very beautiful critique or analysis, I guess, of this very simple four-line phrase that points to that level of experience and control. And the phrase is, on conditionality, is, when this is, that is. From the arising of this comes the arising of that. When this isn't, that isn't. From the stopping of this comes the stopping of that. So you might think, oh, ooh, that's really, I have to unpack that one of those Zen koans. But it's actually, a very beautiful way of stating that whereas we don't always have a lot of control over what comes to us in our experience, for better or for worse, due to causes and conditions that were created in the past. So past actions of body, speech, and mind that, with intention, will have some sort of result. And we experience those in different ways at different times. But all actions with intention that we create will have some effect on us, either in the present or in the future, or both. And there's not huge amounts of control that we have once that momentum has been set in place. And so we experience the results of past karma as time goes on to varying degrees. And we don't necessarily like everything that comes to us, but we don't always have that kind of control to be able to say, I don't want to experience that. I don't want to experience, depression or bad thoughts or negative experiences. I can't. I don't have that kind of absolute control over what's been set in motion. But in the present moment, I do have the capacity to respond in a skillful way that allows the momentum to be expressed, but doesn't pick it up in a way that has to add any layer of suffering to it other than the situation as it just arises right here and now. You don't have to bring it up, pick it up, own it, complicate it, and reinforce it and make it worse and create causes and conditions for it to continue to re-arise in the future. So I do have that control. I have the ability to respond in a very skillful way to whatever it is that comes up from the past. I don't always have the ability to control how people speak to me or what they say or how this body operates or how this mind functions. But I have the ability to respond with clarity and with skill and with wholesome action in the mind and in the body in such a way that I don't pick it up with suffering. So there is control in that sense. We do have that modicum of control. And that's what gives us the capacity, the ability to not suffer in a very changing world. We also have the ability to influence the tendencies in the mind. We're not just a massive complex of greed, hatred, and delusion. We also have the capacity, and probably all of us have developed, at least to some extent, some really skillful qualities of heart, skillful qualities of mind. Things like generosity and kindness and patience, morality, non-harming, discernment, wisdom, the ability to reflect, consider the effects of our actions on ourselves and others, truthfulness, determination, all of these things that we call the paramitas, the paramis, the skillful qualities that we can bring into our hearts. So it's our choice. What do we want to attend to? What do we want to bring up? How do we want to condition our mind? And it's a really useful reflection to, as we were again talking about at the break, at the tea time. It's a very useful reflection to think about the fact that we are going to, at some point, pass away. And what do we want to be bringing with us to whatever it is that comes after? Or even if we don't think that there is anything that comes after, what do we want to bring into the experience of our last days? How do we want our minds to be? Do we want to be caught in that web of ever-seeking pleasurable experience and avoiding with anxiety and fear all the difficult things that come to us, and running towards things, running away from things, trying to maximize temporal happiness? Or do we want to bring qualities that give us a sustaining sense of goodness and refuge that will last us through the challenging times of moving towards the end of our lives, and to whatever it is that may or may not happen after that. So when we reflect on them, we use that reflection of time is passing, and how well am I spending my time? What is it do I want to put my mind towards? What do I want to attend to create a sense of peace, balance, refuge, contentment in a long-lasting way? So, with all the strange stuff and difficult stuff that's happening in the world, if we want to be able to attend to that with any clarity and to do what we can, we have to establish that sense of clarity and peace in our own hearts before we can skillfully act on it. If we try and rectify all the problems of the world from that same place of greed and delusion that's operating out there, then we won't have any meaningful impact. So to me, it's clear that the path of inner development and of skillfully directing my mind to the extent that I can to the abandoning of these unwholesome tendencies and the sustaining and creation of more wholesome tendencies is the way to go. Searching for a more stable place of refuge in a world that, to some significant extent, is not completely under our control. One of the main thing that we learn as we go along, doing that kind of practice with that kind of focus and attention, is how it is that we do have this ability to abandon unskillful states of mind and to create skillful states of mind. And that's a learning process of how to fabricate in our existence, how to create these wholesome qualities. And that's a very important skill, learning how to undo and abandon the difficult, obstructive ones, and how to create and maintain the skillful ones. And as we go along and the mind brightens and the mind settles and things start to take on a sense of greater peace and contentment in our lives, we can also see that even in the creation of very skillful mind habits, tendencies, qualities that help carry us, as it's talked about in the teachings, the paramis help carry us over the floods of the world. As we learn how to construct those skillful states of mind, and as our meditation practice develops, as we get a greater sense of clarity and peace, we also see that even in the construction of these very, very skillful qualities, as wholesome as they are and as necessary as they are, there's a certain amount of stress to have to maintain those, because those are part of the conditioned world too. They're skillful as they are, as good as they are, they're created through our intentions, through our willful effort. And as such, they need to be maintained. if they're not attended to and maintained, then there is the tendency, as long as there's still some greed, hatred, and delusion in our minds, there's the tendency for those to deteriorate. So there's a certain amount of stress in maintaining and continuing fabrication of these very, very wholesome, skillful qualities. And at some point, we reflect on the teachings of relinquishment and letting go, to the extent where the mind, being very still, very quiet, can start to recognize that even these creations are unstable. They're part of the conditioned world, and they have a life of their own. They arise, they cease. And there's a certain amount of stress in maintaining them. And with great care and skill and clarity, we relinquish even the intention to create those qualities. We reached enough stability and peace and refuge in those, and we can always draw on them. But to the extent that we see them very clearly in how we've manufactured them as well, we can practice with stopping all of that whole process of creation, of fabrication. Because we know that they are also inevitably subject to arising and passing away. And at some point in the practice, and this is down the line for most of us, we are able to get more and more familiarity with just allowing the whole process to stop and rest. It's not a matter of annihilation or escape from the world around us, but it's a matter of not creating false expectations of even the most refined qualities that we can create in our minds about their sustainability, their place as a permanent, everlasting refuge. And then if we are able to pursue it to the full level of relinquishment and insight, we'll get a taste of what the unfabricated, the uncreated experience is all about. Again, not pointing to a kind of annihilation of experience, but an ending of the becoming, the attachment to all creations, to all fabrications. The ending of clinging and craving being, even in its subtle forms, the root cause of suffering. And even for a moment, when that stops, there's the opportunity to experience that sense of what lies beyond the world of conditions. This is what's sometimes termed a taste of freedom. So all the worldly conditions around us arise and pass away. We don't have the ability to control the ways of nature. We do have the ability to control and attend to things in a skillful way that leads us to a sense of stability, refuge, and understanding that lies beyond the conditions of the world and the need to control them. And this is a potential that we all have. We need to want to, we need to have the desire, the aspiration to experience that. And that comes through just continuous reflection on what it is that we think is important and where we want to take our refuge. So I think I'll just leave it there for this evening and see if there's any questions or comments or sharing that people might have.